Shifting walls and piercing sound. A fridge that kills and a phone that calls the dead. A guiding star and a friendly janitor. Inhuman bureaucracy creating human monsters. You are a worm through time. The thunder song distorts you. Happiness comes. These are all things featured in the game Control, released by Remedy Entertainment in 2019. Control is an action game for all intents and purposes, but it has heavy paranormal horror themes throughout it. Some would say it's a science fiction, really, but it matters on your perspective. What's the difference between paranormal and paranatural, or thaumaturgical? All three words in this case are describing the same thing in essence, the otherworldly horrors within the lore of Control. The universe of Control is full of terrifying things. In fact, some of the things the game tells you about are scarier than the things actually in the game, and that's what I want to talk about today. The horrors and the story of the Control universe, how they manifest within the game, and how the possibility of more horrors is established within. We'll also discuss the greater connection to what is now known as the Remedy Connected Universe, specifically the connections to Alan Wake, and the horrors within those games as well. Expect spoilers. Also, I expect you to like, comment, and subscribe, please.
Thank you.
This video is made for everyone, people who have played the games and people who haven't, and I'm going to cover as much as I can, but I warn you, this is going to be a lot. So, come along with me as we travel deep into the bowels of the oldest house, to explore the unknown, the known, and that which is written, but heavily redacted.
The word that describes this is redacted.
To kick us off, I'll need to tell you a bit more about the main story of Control. Context is important after all. Wouldn't want to go stumbling around in the dark without a flashlight now, would you? In Control, you play as
Jesse Faden,
a young woman in search of her younger brother, guided by a strange entity that lives within her head. She's led to a mysterious skyscraper in New York that only she can seem to see. This building, we will learn, is called the Oldest House. The walls inside it shift and change, and it houses a clandestine government-adjacent agency known as the Federal Bureau of Control. I say government-adjacent because they don't really have any oversight from the government, at least not now. At least not an earthly government. Once inside the Bureau, Jesse happens upon a dead man, seemingly having shot himself. She takes up his gun and quickly finds herself with a brand new job, the director of the Bureau of Control. Turns out the dead man was the previous director, and picking up his magic gun is how you put in an application for his job. Her interviewer? A mysterious entity or group of entities known as the Board, which either reside in or send messages through a giant black upside-down pyramid in a dimension known as the astral plane. These messages are garbled, but our character and ourselves understand them, even though some words are a little mixed in what they might mean. This begins Jesse's journey into the weird of the world of Control. The weird that she always believed in but never had proof of until now. You see, Jesse's brother, Dylan, disappeared when they were children, and she's believed for most of her life that this very organization took him. And now she's here, where they reside, and guess what? They're real. There are, of course, problems along her journey back to her brother. No story is a story without conflict. First and foremost, the oldest house is under lockdown, and now she's trapped inside of it. Either brought inside by the thing in her head, or a janitor who might actually be a Finnish god of some kind. We don't know.
Ahti the janitor is a friendly face in my book.
Better than somebody with no face at all. Think about it. No face.
The reason for the lockdown, though? The hiss. What are the hiss, you might ask? The hiss are an infectious sound or energy. It takes over humans and changes them. It has many forms, from people floating in comas who recite a strange poem-like incantation endlessly, one you've heard a little bit of already, Really, every hiss recite this, but these ones are seemingly like the signal towers of the hiss, to full-on monsters who have taken on a reddish-orange glow as they mutate. These monstrous mutations range from normal zombie-like human entities with that orange glow and a little bit of human ability like shooting guns and fighting to full-on, no longer being human monstrosities that sometimes look like demons, or human beings who didn't have psychic powers who now do after being infected. But the hiss aren't the only problems in the oldest house. There are also things called altered objects. Objects that, without getting into the weeds, are basically possessed by something. Whether sentient or simply some type of energy that causes things to act out of their usual behavior, it's hard to tell.
The exact process of how an altered item is born eludes us. The superstitious would call them cursed. Are altered items sentient? Not quite. They're often fixated, programmed almost to cause certain events to happen over and over again.
These things are already troublesome, but even they are affected by the hiss resonance, which is making them act erratic and even more dangerous than usual. These things can range from a rubber ducky that moves and quacks and basically just scares people, to a Christmas tree that mimics people's voices in low frequencies and apparently makes them go crazy over time. There's also a fridge that can cause a lot of damage if you stop looking at it. It likes to have attention. There is a film camera that literally puts you in a film-like scenario about your life, seemingly trying to hurt you or at least exaggerating things to a degree that can hurt you. These objects are changed by paranormal or otherworldly forces, which the FBC describe as different types of paranormal
Resonance.
or energy, though they use the word paranatural usually. There are variations of altered objects, of course. They have different power levels, so to speak. The main variation of these objects are known as objects of power. These are altered objects whose abilities are on a different level, and people with paranormal or psychic abilities can even use these objects to give themselves the powers the objects hold. Within the world of the game, though, our main character, Jesse Faden, is one of the most powerful paranatural people that exists, or at least has been known so far. She's one of the only ones who can do the crazy things with her powers that they've seen. The reason people can bind these objects and use their powers is thanks to the board in the astral plane, who are connected to the objects of power in some way, whether naturally or by a link forced by the board is unknown.
So objects of power are mundane objects that house paranatural energies and have developed a link to the astral plane and can thus be controlled, which is what differentiates them from altered items, which are still housings of paranatural forces, but are more volatile and cannot be bound in the parutilitarian sense. Got it?
Though some scientists within the game, specifically Emily Pope, one of the lead scientists we encounter, believes that the objects of power might actually be connected to other paranatural forces, and the board just uses them to help the director and other parutilitarians that they're using. The FBC call these psychics Parautilitarians because they want to use very sciencey language, because the FBC used to have a past based in like occultism and magic and ritual worship and all that kind of stuff.
It's not superstition if it works.
Okay, so we've established quite a bit already. It might even be an overwhelming amount of information, but I promise it's important. We've given you some set dressing of the world of control and told you some of the range of possibilities of the different horrible things that are in it. Possessed objects that act certain ways that can harm people, and sounds that can possess people. Remember when I said Jessie came into the building looking for her brother? Well, it turns out he's possessed by the hiss as well, but his paranatural abilities allow him to maintain some of his sentience.
But I'm better now. The hiss made me better.
Push the fingers through the surface into the wet. You've always been the new you.
Jessie, as I said earlier, is also a parutilitarian, as you can see from the gameplay on screen and the aforementioned powers. This is how she gets the job as director. The entity in her head, which she calls Polaris and is represented by a swirling crystal-like pattern on screen, is thought to be the reason she has these powers early on in the game. Or she always had the paranatural powers, and that's what allows the being to be in her head and talk to her. It's hard to know, chicken or egg, both are brought up at different points in the game. But we do know she is almost taken over by the Hiss herself at the beginning of the game, but is only saved by Polaris, who pushes them out. This is how she hears the hissing sound that the entity makes when it tries to possess people, because she was almost taken herself. So as you can tell, there are a lot of otherworldly presences at play within the world of Control, even just in the game. So far, we've got the Hiss, we've got Polaris, we've got the Board, we've got unnamed entities that can create altered objects, we've got Ati, the janitor, who seems to be a god, or at least very knowledgeable of things and able to do things regular people aren't. Oh, and did I mention that Control and the Alan Wake series are connected, so the Darkness monsters in Alan Wake are also a being that exists in this same universe? Yeah, there's a lot of bad stuff. Some of them are more malevolent or benevolent than others. Polaris, for the most part, seems to be a good entity, one that wants to help Jesse specifically, but also by extension, mankind. The Board, on the other hand, are a somewhat morally gray entity. They do help humans sometimes, but they also seem to have their own wants and goals. This is shown especially in the Control DLC The Foundation, where they do something that hurts an important character to seemingly preserve themselves. Then there's the Darkness from Alan Wake. Is it evil in the way that we think of evil, or is it just acting within its nature, and its nature happens to hurt people? And the Hiss, finally, seem to almost be entirely malevolent, at least to humans. Their one goal seems to be to corrupt people and different things, and to destroy that which they can't corrupt. How do I know that? Well, I need to tell you more of the story to get there. You see, a lot of the stuff going on in Control is actually really recent. Apparently the bureaus existed for like over 100 years. It could be longer, it might have been something else before it was an official government agency, but we never really learn about that. The oldest house itself was discovered in the late 60s.
August 4th, 1964. We discovered the oldest house while investigating a suspected altered world event case in the New York City subway tunnels.
As was the Board and the service weapon, which is the magic gun that Jesse uses and is connected to the Board.
Northmore even made a discovery. A pistol, placed on a stone pedestal in front of that strange ebony pillar. Hours after finding this weapon, Northmore cornered me to spout some nonsense about how the Board had made him the director.
By the way, the reason that I said that it's not really an official government agency anymore is because even though they take money from the government, they're basically being instructed by the Board at this point, but that's like a kind of a subplot about whether the Board is good or bad. Anyway, most of the Bureau's experience with the paranatural or paranormal came in the shape of different objects that they dealt with, and also events called AWEs.
There is a curious correlation with the yet unknowable forces intruding upon our world, in the form of altered world events.
These are, at least as described by the Bureau, when paranormal forces exert force or intrude upon our world. These events in the past have created altered items and resulted in many deaths, among other strange occurrences. An example of one such AWE, the earliest that you can read about in the game, is AWE-3, which took place in Sawyer County, Wisconsin. This AWE resulted in 3 gigantic sinkholes forming underneath a hill. The local Boys Youth Science League was doing an archaeological dig on that hill and fell into the resulting pits, which apparently had some type of otherworldly magma material sitting inside of them. The boys said the material felt pleasant to the touch, but were found screaming and later mutated. Over subsequent years, they would suffer from further deformities and changes in their mental health, such as increased aggression and periods of confusion. AWEs can be caused by a lot of things, such as energies, but one of the main reasons they happen are things called thresholds, which are literally overlaps or connections of our dimension with another dimension. The oldest house itself is full of thresholds and constantly overlaps and creates them. One is known as the mold threshold, another the black quarry, and another simply called the water threshold.
Match, other dimensions leak in. We call these areas thresholds. The quarry is one of the more stable thresholds in the maintenance sector. That's That's where black rock comes from.
You heard that too, right?
Dimensional matter.
Black rock comes from a threshold.
It's interesting to me how the Bureau treats the paranormal, especially when it comes to the specific moment in time that Control takes place. Originally, as you find in the documents, the agency was a lot more steeped in the occult. They believed in rituals and spirits and all the like, even going so far as to have different terminology than they do in the game currently. The terminology used by the time Control is happening is specifically meant to make the paranormal sound more scientific, to distance the agency from its once occult-based roots. And I think the game itself is making an argument for both ways of looking at it. It's very obvious as you go through the game that the agency has learned a lot about the paranormal, even finding a material that can help manage certain paranormal things. This material is known as Black Rock, which they found in the mysterious threshold called Corey, which is connected to the oldest house. But at the same time, what they're dealing with is so removed from what we would call normal that it's hard to know if the different paranormal events and entities would follow already established rules even of other paranormal instances. An example of a rule some paranormal phenomena seem to follow is the law of threes. Basically, it's the idea that certain phenomena will always have three parts to them. We can see this in Alan Wake 2's DLC The Lake House, which takes place in an FBC facility. The main character becomes trapped inside of an altered space, which loops 3 times. Or how in Control, you must pull a light switch 3 times for it to transport you to different locations. Remedy is also really cheeky, and apparently a lot of things within the Control and Alan Wake series follow the law of threes, because it's also a really good thing for narrative structure and also task structure. Doing things in 3 parts, or having a narrative in 3 parts is pretty easy to follow. I mean, the hero's journey, which Alan Wake literally follows in a meta-narrative sense, is in 3 parts. But something else the Bureau thought to be a rule was also broken in Alan Wake 2. The earlier mentioned black rock has generally worked for the Bureau to contain paranatural forces.
Think of it as paranatural lead. That's what the black rock line firebreaks are about. The panopticon container cells.
But Alan, possessed by the dark presence, is able to destroy a black rock containment cell. Dr. Hartman, a character from Alan Wake 1 who also becomes possessed by the dark presence, also manages to escape the containment of black rock. But the Painted, an enemy in the Alan Wake 2 DLC The Lake House, can be destroyed by concentrated black rock powder. Could it be that the darkness can't be controlled by black rock because it's also dark, like black rock? That would be a simple explanation. Probably not. If you're wondering why I keep bringing up Alan Wake, it's because, as I said earlier, Alan Wake and Control are connected by the Remedy Connected Universe. In fact, it started with Alan Wake 1. There is a place known as Cauldron Lake, and within that lake is a strange dimension and entities that seem to be made up of darkness. This power and the entities that also exist there can use people's creativity to make things in our world come true, and does so to try and proliferate itself, at least seemingly. It's complicated like everything else in this universe. Like there's an implication that Alan might have created the FBC and the Hiss to get himself out of the place called the Dark Place, which is this other dimension that exists in the lake, and that he's actually an incredibly powerful parautilitarian. And we don't know if the darkness itself actually has a goal, or if it's just certain entities created of it that feed off of people's darkness and creativity have goals, but the power itself doesn't. Jumping back to Control, there's also an entity known as the Mold. I mentioned earlier the Mold Threshold, and I'm sure you can put 2 and 2 together. The Mold is another problem in the oldest house that you run into. Apparently the dimension it comes from overlaps with the oldest house, creating a threshold, which begins to proliferate the mold within. The FBC don't fully understand the mold either. The mold smells really good to people and apparently makes them want to eat it. But if you eat it, you might see where this is going, it kills you and then takes you over and you become a creature called the Molded. You become a sort of living, half-dead mold creature that wants to eat more mold and kill others to infect them. The mold itself is theorized by one of the scientists in the game, Dr. Raya Underhill, to actually be made up of thousands of smaller entities building out a superstructure of sorts. By the way, I forgot to mention this, but it's also terrifying to work for the FBC in the oldest house specifically, because the oldest house can have thresholds overlapping with it from other dimensions, and it also shifts itself. So you could be in a bathroom and then just appear somewhere and not be able to get out of the bathroom, and You're just gonna die in that bathroom with your shit in the toilet, and that's what you get for working at this crazy place. Though, of course, as you can already tell, the oldest house isn't the only place in the world of Control and Alan Wake that can cross over with other dimensions. A lot of those are what calls AWEs, but there are some that are more stable connections. Cauldron Lake from the Alan Wake series, as mentioned earlier, is a consistent threshold to another dimension that is always there, but acts at different times. That dimension is known as the Dark Place, and it's where Alan is trapped in Alan Wake 2, and is the source of all of the conflict in the Alan Wake series. Whether or not the darkness or the dark presence itself is evil, or just happens to do bad things as its nature, is hard to tell. I guess with that in mind, we would call it evil against humanity. Okay, so I've explained a lot of the universe now, back to the story. As you go through Control, you learn that Dylan was taken by the agency to be groomed as its next director. His paranormal powers made him perfect for the role, but as we'll learn, scientists and bureaucrats do not make good adoptive parents. Dylan's life at the FBC was hellish. They treat him more like a science project than a human being, and this leads him to growing hateful and resentful of them and most of humanity. I mean, you can see a small microcosm of what he had to deal with even as a little kid, as you can find a show made for him by the people working at the FBC called The Threshold Kids, which explores the many terrifying concepts of the Bureau in a not-so-comforting and terrifying way. It's like Sesame Street, but for the mentally disturbed.
What if I don't want the big chair?
What if I don't want the big chair?
Everyone wants the big chair, Meg!
That's why we're all here. Use those brains to listen for once, or the only chair you'll get in is the one with straps.
But what led Dylan to being brought to the FBC in the first place? Were they just found with their powers? Why is he also possessed by the hiss? Like, what's going on? Finding out Dylan and Jesse's backstory is, in my opinion, one of the most memorable moments in Control. After playing through most of the game, you're eventually led to a place called the Ordinary AWE. It's hinted at and mentioned multiple times throughout the game that some big event in their hometown called Ordinary led to all of this happening, all the way back in Jesse and Dylan's youth, and this is it. In fact, this event was even hinted at all the way back in Alan Wake's American Nightmare, like 6 years before this game even came out. When you arrive in the Ordinary AWE containment area, you follow a trail of documents that tell you about the Ordinary AWE. The documents feature interviews with Jesse and Dylan Faden when they were children, but also scraped from Jesse's therapy sessions as an adult.
As real as what happened in Ordinary, the industrial accident in your hometown.
Yes, the FBC were following her, but never took her in. Why? Well, they didn't really need her because they had Dylan. All the way back in 2002, 17 years before the events of Control, when Jesse and Dylan were both 11 and 10, they would find a slide projector in their hometown of Ordinary's dump, where they played often with their friends. The slide projector in question seemed to work without power and came with a handful of slides. When a slide was placed in the projector, it would create a literal door into another world, the picture in the slide being the exact location where you would leave into that world. There were many dimensions that they had slides of, 8 to be specific. One with an empty house full of dolls that they used as a secret play place. One with a large hand-like structure, which is where they met Polaris. One had a field full of strange flowers that make you dream of things melting. Jesse and Dylan's friend Neil liked that one a lot, and would go to the dump often to visit it. During one such occasion, the town bully, Tom, found Neil with his gang and beat him up, taking the slide projector, with Neil possibly still inside. The bullies would begin to visit a slide Jesse and her friends called the Temple, which was apparently more of a nuclear bunker. In it, they found an entity that Jesse called the Not Mother and her babies. While seemingly non-hostile at first, this changed when it began to feed the bullies its milk. This would begin to mutate them, making them violent but still seemingly human at first. One day, a teacher would try to stop one of their violent outbursts, and in response, they broke her legs and bashed her head in. Tom and his gang would be arrested for the murder, screaming that the Not Mother would make them all go away. Jesse and Dylan were apparently interrogated by their parents about the slide projector after this incident. That night, Jesse would wish that her parents, along with all adults, would disappear. The next day, every adult in Ordinary would vanish. It is not known whether Polaris, or the entity the Not Mother, did this. We can assume it was the Not Mother, considering Polaris's seemingly benevolent nature, but we don't know. Jesse, Dylan, and the rest of the town's kids would then band together the next day to stop Tom and his gang, who were slowly being transformed into monsters by the Not Mother, which Jesse and Dylan called dung monkeys. They'd taken it to a place called the Sled Hill Cave and had let the portal stay open. Jesse, Dylan, and the town's kids all went in and fought to get their projector back, and were nearly caught by the dung monkeys, but were eventually saved by Neil, apparently, who'd become a melted dog-like creature. The slide projector would not turn off, but with the help of Polaris, Jesse and Dylan were able to turn it off, ending the AWE and trapping Tom, his gang, the Not Mother, and possibly Neil in the dimension called the Temple. Jesse, upset by the events obviously, would then burn the slides, all except one, the hand which allowed them to find Polaris. Not long after these events, the Bureau would arrive, begin to take in and interview the surviving children, and attempt to take in Dylan and Jesse. Jesse, sensing the danger, would escape, and Dylan would be taken in to become known as Prying Candidate 6, leading to his years of torturous priming by the Bureau for him to be the future director. Jesse would feel years of guilt for not trying to help Dylan more or going with him. This segment is capped off by finding a gigantic model of the entire town, marked with the different stages of the AWE, as well as where the different events occurred. This stuck with me a lot because of the simplicity of the story, but how much it elicits through its telling. It almost feels like you're reading a Stephen King novel as you read it. The bullies being named Tom Barlow specifically reminds me of King's writing. The Not Mother is also a very evocative name of a creature that reminds me of King's writing. When you think of a mother, most people tend to think of a caring being, one that brings life into the world and fosters it. Something being called the Not Mother makes one think of the opposite of that. What is not a mother? Enough that you would call it a mother to elicit that idea, but then you also have to throw the word not at the beginning of it, so you get the idea, hey, this isn't a mother, it's a trick. They love doing this in the Remedy universe, though. A later creature in Control's AWE DLC is called the Thing That Had Been Hartman.
By hungry darkness, it became the thing that had been Hartman. Only an echo of him remained, fragmented impulses on autoplay, violent, bloodthirsty darkness in the driver's seat. Emerging from the lake, the Thing was captured by the FBC. The Thing broke loose, killed everyone it could. The FBC fell back and sealed the sector. Then something else came. Not darkness, but similar enough. A sound. A resonance. The darkness inside the Thing could have been immune, could have resisted, fought, could have been passed by, passed through with no effect. But it didn't, and it wasn't. A metamorphosis followed. The Thing that had been Hartman went through another change.
However, there's actually more to this story as well, because I've been saying all of these events lead to the events of Control. You see, the director, Zachariah Trench, the man we find dead at the start of the game, found a half-burnt slide and stashed it in his pocket as a souvenir. Years later, after much investigation into the slide projector, they would eventually use it. Dr. Darling, the head researcher, Trench, and a few other scientists would go in together. Here, Trench would hear a sound that was so harsh it made his ears bleed, and felt as if something had drilled deep down inside of him.
Resonance from an unknown source, in part within the range of audible frequency. It acts in unpredictable ways, causing feedback loops that can tear you apart. Trench insists he heard something else. It made his ears bleed. Our equipment found no evidence of anything beyond the primary resonance. Trench's medical tests showed nothing amiss. Where Hedred stopped the spread of another. It's another source of resonance. Trench was exposed to this other. It will now spread.
This sound would stay with him for many years, slowly wearing him down. Despite tests done on him, he seemed fine. Meanwhile, the head researcher, Dr. Darling, after many expeditions, would also meet Polaris, or an entity similar to Polaris.
We located the source of the resonance in Slidescape 36. It is an entity, a living organism of a considerable mass. I've named it Hedron based on its physical shape.
Hedron.
We built a
Was
container
that
for it.
you? Did he bring you here? Is that why you brought me here?
They'd found a physical being that manifests Polaris in the hand slide, known as Hedron, and brought it back to the oldest house. Using this, Darling would create devices known as HRAs for people to wear, as Polaris or Hedron warned him of the coming Hiss invasion.
Think of them as a life preserver. Only instead of water, the thing HRAs protect you from is classified.
Darling would eventually be taken away and disappear, possibly by Polaris or whatever this being is, somewhere else, to another dimension we don't know. Trench would eventually be driven insane by the Hiss resonance inside of him. Believing that Polaris was infecting the others, he would use the burnt slide that he had hid to himself to let the Hiss in.
An answer. I'll take the slide projector to the nostalgia department. I'll turn it on. I'll bring the Hiss in. I'll fix this. I can hear them plotting against me. We've been invaded, corrupted. I've lost Darling. He was the first to go. He's been exposed to Hedron's resonance. It controls him now. It controls everyone who wears the amplifier device. I ordered them not to use the damn things. They didn't listen. Hedron corrupted the Bureau. They'll never be people again. They're either dead or they're monsters. I'll stop them.
Starting this entire outbreak of these horrifying entities are Entity, and leading to the events of the game. When Jessie does get to where the slide projector was originally used, she can see a sort of residual picture of where the portal had once been, showing what the hand looked like. She also gets to meet Hedron, which is then very quickly destroyed by the Hiss, leading to Jessie nearly being possessed again. Thankfully, Jessie's parautilitarian powers are so strong that she is able to push the Hiss out and becomes a conduit for Polaris herself. Where Hedron was the conduit, Jessie is now.
Grow brighter around one constant. They revolve. Hedron is dead, but you're alive here in me. Maybe Hedron put you in our heads when we met her. Maybe you were always there, and she was just trying to teach me how to trigger you. Maybe I'll never understand.
Of course, she then has to end the conflict, which the game is all about. She goes to the slide projector and turns it off, thus stopping the Hiss from entering, disconnecting her brother's connection to the Hiss, seemingly, which puts him in a coma, and ending the story of the game. Jessie is now the director, and we are looking to the future. If you can't already tell, Control and the Remedy Extended Universe is a really unique and complex setting. I mean, it's pretty obvious that the FBC is based, at least in part, on the SCP Foundation of online horror fame, but most all the concepts based around paranormal stuff being collected comes from that one scene at the end of Indiana Jones and the Lost Ark. One of my favorite things about a setting like Control is the possibilities of what could be within its universe. Within the game itself, you read about a lot of the altered world events and altered items that they dealt with, and even talk to characters who were involved with them. One such AWE had people calling the FBC, or like the government, about a werewolf, and when a team of FBC agents responded, it turned out that it wasn't a werewolf, but a hand chair that moved insanely fast and powerfully when the full moon was out. The funny thing is, one of the people who is in this team, a main character in the story of the game named Arish, jokes about how ridiculous it was that people thought it was a werewolf, but They're literally dealing with things that people don't believe in, so why does this guy think it being a werewolf is ridiculous? They get so used to these odd things that becomes the new normal, but then you have these extreme examples of things within the universe that are abnormal even to them, like the hiss, or the dark place in Alan Wake and the dark presence, the slide projector and Polaris, the Not Mother in those documents, simply mentioned but reading off as very terrifying, the mold, the board itself being this giant inverted pyramid, either housing the beings or working like a telephone pole for them, where these things are like in a different dimension and access people through their minds, or this magic paranormal telephone. Oh yeah, and I guess I haven't mentioned the former yet, have I? The former is kind of important as well. The former is a giant snake tentacle bug-like creature with a spotlight for an eye that possesses altered items or is attached to them that Jesse has to fight throughout Control. You find out in the Foundation DLC that this thing was at some point part of or related to the board. I mean, look at this. This is the definition of alien. This is the definition of something otherworldly. It is a giant, almost old god-like entity, and Jesse just like at one point has a conversation with it. And is totally chill about it, just completely like, yeah, this is fine, and even kind of jokes around with it. You do find out that it is kind of a friend in the Foundation DLC, but up until that point, this thing is scary. You have to fight it in boss fights in these void arenas where it is the biggest thing in there. I am frightened by things that are this big, and this thing is fucking huge. And of course, there's the implications of what paranatural powers can do. There are many implications in both Alan Wake and Control that Alan's writing in The Dark Place has influenced events on a world scale, possibly creating the entirety of Control itself, or at least that's hinted at. Or maybe he's just influencing it, or predicting it. And then there's the Lake House DLC for Alan Wake 2, where you find some of Dylan Faden's drawings that were sent by Dr. Darling to the two scientists there who run the Lake House. This opens up another can of worms. Did Dylan, while drawing these pictures, leave some type of psychic imprint on them of his rage at like humanity and the FBC, and then when they were sent to the Lake House, the dark presence could like attach itself to that, and then Dylan creates the hiss because of these drawings and his anger, in combination with like Alan being even possibly influenced by it? I know it sounds like I'm rambling, but this makes sense if you've been paying attention. There will be a test next lesson, so you need to be taking notes. That gets into the human elements of horror. The fact that the FBC, through all the records you read, have been treating humans like disposable things, torturing Dylan, literally bringing in contractors and allowing them to die when working on the buildings in the early days of it. Like, the FBC literally treats people very inhumanely. There's almost an implication in dealing with these inhuman things that the FBC loses some of its humanity along the way, and this is something that Jesse wants to change when she becomes the director and talks about towards the end of the game, because some of the stuff that you read about is just kind of dark and really messed up. You don't want to lose your humanity along the way with dealing with things to save humanity, because then you're kind of becoming the thing that you're trying to deal with. Not to mention that there are actual paranatural criminal organizations mentioned in the game. There's a group called the Blessed Group who literally make these objects and then send them to people and put them out in the world just for them to cause chaos, and you don't know much about them, but they do get a woman disintegrated with a fondue set, and they also kill a bunch of people on a train by making it possessed, basically. Fun fact, the same group does get mentioned in Alan Wake 2, and it's possible that they're going to be included in Control 2 in the future. It's going to be really interesting if they are. The altered objects themselves are really interesting when dived into, and the horror that they can cause. The FBC theorizes that altered objects are created by powers from other dimensions, but are also affected by human perception and concepts of what the objects are and fears attached to them. An example of this would be the floppy disk, which basically gives Jesse telekinesis. The disk itself contained Soviet launch codes, and literally allows Jesse to launch things with her mind. That's even what the power is called in the game, which leads one to think that the perception of launch and the danger of nuclear missiles gave this inanimate object the power to launch things itself, by whatever supernatural entity imbued it with power in the first place. And that's one of the more normal objects in the game. Some of the scarier ones that I like are the Get Well balloon and the baby pram. The balloon is a mylar balloon that says Get Well on it, obviously. It seems to produce a black tar-like substance that leaks down its ribbon to the floor and attracts animals, and if animals lick or eat that black tar-like substance, they will die and seemingly produce the same fluid from their own orifices. It was found in a children's hospital, by the way. It killed, like, all of the helping animals that were there, apparently. Then there's the baby pram. It's just a baby pram that really thick black smoke just emanates from for no reason. It was found because apparently someone called in that a pawn shop was on fire because it just started smoking and filled the whole pawn shop with smoke and killed the owner because he couldn't breathe. Big spoilers for the Alan Wake 2 DLC Lake House, but in that, the main antagonist, or at least one of the antagonists, is a sentient painting. You see, the two scientists that ran the lake house were studying the effects of art on the dark place and the dark presence in an attempt to outperform each other. This would eventually lead them to using draconian methods to get art out of different subjects for study, which would result in one of the subjects tragically taking his own life.
Lane was dying, both murderer and victim.
This is extra sad when you know the context, because the character is a character that you can meet and talk to in Alan Wake 1, and he's a really interesting and nice guy, and his paintings could kind of predict the future. And this happens to him because he's talented, and the scientist people have no humanity. The painting was a self-portrait that he made with his own blood that then took on the raw emotions of the act and his life force because of the creative powers of the dark place. This painting being like one of the truest expressions of artistic emotion there in that facility would draw in the darkness and eventually lead to the facility being taken over by the darkness. When you meet the painting in the DLC, it continually recites words from Alan Wake's manuscript pages describing its creation and the suffering of the artist who made it.
No brush, just himself!
The real interesting thing is whether or not the painting is still technically sentient within the facility, which we don't get an answer for just yet. Is it there? Is it actually alive? Or is it just attached with this echo of, like, the horrific sadness and anger that the artist felt? And was this all influenced by Alan Wake? Was he writing about something that was already happening? That's another big thing in this universe, but we'll talk about that some other time. This type of interaction is also one that is super interesting and horrifying in the series of connected games. In the Control DLC AWE, Emil Hartman, an antagonist from the first Alan Wake game, is brought back to the FBC after being taken by the darkness. This is something that the darkness can do to people who aren't creative and are affected by its story. They basically get possessed by the darkness or the dark presence and then used as its puppets. Once within the walls of the FBC, Hartman would eventually break out of containment, again showing that Blackrock isn't a perfect solution to containing paranormal entities, and then go on a rampage, killing any FBC employee he could find. He would be locked in the sector that he had escaped into, and then the Hiss invasion would happen, and the Hiss resonance would also try to possess him as well. However, the two forces could not take control of him completely, and thus created a new third type of entity, both part dark and part Hiss resonance. He mutates horrifically because of this, and even lashes out and kills the Hiss around him. If he doesn't have a human target, such as Jesse, to focus on, that is. So this, of course, shows another possibility, something that can be taken over by two evil forces, which then collide and become a brand new thing completely. Not one, not the other, but a little of both. Not to mention the darkness itself in Alan Wake, having the power to make any creative work reality, but also possess people, possess objects, possess animals, bring the dead back to life and gain some level of sentience to speak through them, create entire worlds seemingly within its own little dimension, and we still don't know if the darkness itself, as in the realm, is sentient, or if it purely acts upon the whims of creative people. Is the dark presence itself sentient? Is the dark place itself more of like a dimension that is semi-sentient like an animal and just does what it does? We learn in Alan Wake 2 that the dark presence was apparently a semi-sentient being created by Alan in a loop-de-loop retcon kind of way, but it also states that there are other dark presences within the dark place. But what does that say about the dark place more broadly? And the fact that the dark place has, more than likely, influenced events all over the world in some way, or at least that's implied. All this to say that, yeah, Control and Alan Wake, the connected universe, is full of terrors. And that's not even getting into the fact that there's a soft connection with one of Remedy's other games, Quantum Break, which is owned by Microsoft, so they can't really do things with it, but they kind of soft involved it in the current game by bringing in actors from it and concepts from it, and even giving characters new names who are basically the same character but legally distinct. You get what I'm saying. So yeah, in this universe, you can be taken over by a sound or possessed by darkness that both turn you into mindless monsters, repeating your own words like catchphrases or a Dadaist poem. Have your fate written out or created by an artist. Be killed by a refrigerator. Be killed by an astral spike.
X-rays and... What the fuck is that thing? God, it burst right out of him. Call Black! Get Marshall!
You could be smoked to death by a pram. You could fall into magma from another dimension. You could be enticed to eat mold that then transforms you into a mold monster. You could apparently be fed milk by something called the Not Mother and become a monster that is described as a dung monkey. And that's just what we know about. That's just things that we've read about and seen in the games. That's not even to mention what the future holds for these connected series and where it could go onwards, because they've already done so much with it, and that just makes you think, well, what's going to happen next? When I think about this universe, I get giddy about those possibilities. Of course, any creative fictional universe has infinite possibilities. You can make up one yourself, but what excites me is the structure and the obvious artistry and writing to it all. It all fits within these stories that work with these worlds being created and do effectively create horror using these different themes and monsters and elements all together. They've created these worlds and still managed to carve out a story within them while keeping them themselves interesting, which is something that I love that creatives can do. And that's not even getting into the allegory and the symbolisms of things, like the fact that the darkness and the dark presence in Alan Wake are pretty obviously allegories for the shadow, which then becomes literal in the Lake House DLC when the FBC is studying it. Or the hiss being a representation of Dylan's anger at his treatment and control, a literal manifestation of hate and rage towards humanity, but specifically the scientists. The altered objects themselves literally being affected by human perception and mass consciousness, at least that's the FBC's theory. But what else is there? What is the board? What are the other horrific entities that lie beyond the thin veil that shelters the universe there? You know, the things that are affecting these items, the Not Mother. Where else can it go? What are all these beings? I don't know, but I love it. I love Sam Lake's writing, I love Remedy's games, and I look forward to seeing even more of it. And I won't lie, this video covers a lot of the core topics of this series while trying to just talk about the monsters and the different horrific entities within it, but it doesn't even cover like half of the details that you'd really need to get into everything. Even just the scary stuff, by the way. Like, I am barely scratching the surface here. I'm sure some other Remedy superfan could watch this video and point out all the ways that I'm wrong or little things that I messed up on, which is fine. I did my best and am by no means a lore expert or a writing expert. I'm just passionate about the series and wanted to talk about this. I've been a fan of Remedy for a long time, like all the way back since Max Payne. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it made you interested in Remedy and their games. If it did, maybe check out the games themselves. Even watch some of the videos on them, but the games are also great. Like, I really recommend them. Control goes on sale a lot. Alan Wake goes on sale a lot. Quantum Break goes on sale a lot. But really, what I would recommend is Alan Wake and Control are like two of their best games, in my opinion. Of course, Max Payne are, but they're very old, and you gotta do some things to kind of get them running. Also, check out some of my other videos if you liked this one. I did a video on the game Crow Country and a lot of the symbolism and the story in that, and this video on the Boiled Wind phenomenon, which talks about similar things in this like idea of paranormal fiction and some of the topics that are explored within it, especially online ones. Also, I know this is kind of random, but Alan Wake 1 is one of my favorite games of all time, and it has this vibe that I've barely felt in any other game, even its own sequel. Control 2 is like this almost entirely unique game in the vibes that it has, so if you'd like to see more videos on these topics or similar topics, let me know. I could probably talk about them forever. So yeah, thanks for watching. I'm Ghost on Holiday, and remember, Happy Thanksgiving. I wanted this to be out on the 25th, but here we are. I think it's coming out on Thanksgiving. I want to say I'm thankful for you guys watching my channel, for anyone who gives my channel a chance. It grew a lot this year, and while it's kind of stagnated, I'm still very happy that so many people even wanted to watch the things that I made, and I'm hoping that, you know, we can see more growth as things go on, and I'm hoping people like this This year kind of sucked, but after I put this video out, I'm going to get to go have dinner with my family and relax, and I'm really looking forward to it, so have a good one.